Her mom forced infertile alien girl to marry a human, but when she saw her daughter pregnant, the galaxy was vast, with species so varied that the idea of unity between them seemed almost impossible. The Zelthari, a race of tall, elegant aliens, had ruled over planets for centuries, seeing themselves as the galaxy's finest species. They were physically strong, technologically advanced, and culturally proud. But not all Zelthari were the same. Among them was a group known as the Steriles, those unable to reproduce. This was a condition that had become rare in their society, but it existed nonetheless, and those who were sterile were often seen as lesser. Zelthara had always known her place in the world. As a sterile, she would never bear children. Her life would always be one of service and politeness, though she was highly intelligent and respected within her community. Yet despite her status and achievements, she had always carried a secret resentment. The world around her, the Zelthari way of life, was both cold and unforgiving. She could never escape the shadow of her condition. Her mother, Andara, was one of the most powerful figures in Zelthari politics. As a leader, she was known for her fierce determination to maintain the status quo, ensuring that her people remained at the top of the galactic food chain. Andara had fought tirelessly to establish the Zelthari as rulers in the galaxy. But in a world dominated by alien factions, Andara knew that strength alone would not secure their future. It was through alliances that real power could be built. That's when the humans came into play. The human species had spread across the galaxy, small in numbers but strong in will. They were just beginning to establish themselves as a major player in the galactic community. Andara saw potential in the humans, particularly in their diplomats who had worked well with the Zelthari in several negotiations. She knew that an alliance with them would be strategic, a future where humans and Zelthari could work side by side, united for the betterment of both species. But there was a problem. The Zelthari people valued purity, and the thought of interbreeding with humans was unthinkable. However, Andara had a plan, one that would solve two problems at once. If her daughter, Zelthara, were to marry a human, it would not only seal the alliance but also show the other alien species that the Zelthari were adaptable, willing to change with the times. Zelthara was not happy about her mother's decision. She was not just upset about the marriage itself, but the fact that it was arranged without her consent. She would never have chosen a human husband. Humans were beneath them in many ways, a species still struggling to hold onto their place in the galaxy. To her, the idea of being bound to one of them was a humiliation. But there was little she could do to protest. Her mother's word was law, and the political stakes were too high. The man she was to marry was Eric Lawson, a human diplomat from Earth. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that had impressed the Zelthari during their meetings. Eric was known for his calm demeanor, his focus on peacekeeping, and his ability to see things from multiple perspectives. The Zelthari Council had given him a position of respect, despite the fact that he was human. Zelthara met him for the first time when they both boarded the diplomatic ship heading to Zelthora, the capital of the Zelthari Empire. He stood on the deck, watching the stars outside, clearly lost in thought. His posture was relaxed, yet there was an air of purpose to him, something that intrigued Zelthara. "You're early," Zelthara said as she approached, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. Eric turned to face her, offering a small smile. "I like to be prepared," he replied in a calm, even tone. Zelthara couldn't help but notice how handsome he was. It was strange, though, that despite her resentment for the arranged marriage, her body reacted in ways she hadn't expected. She immediately pushed the thought away, choosing instead to focus on the reality that she had no choice in this matter. "We're not really doing this, are we?" she muttered under her breath. Eric raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" "This, marriage," she said with a hint of bitterness in her voice. "Is it really necessary? Eric studied her for a moment. I don't know if I would have chosen it either, but it's the reality. Sometimes we don't get to choose the circumstances we're given. Her eyes narrowed. You sound too calm about it. I've learned that the best way to handle difficult situations is to stay calm. We both know this is bigger than us, so we should focus on what's best for both our peoples. Zelthara felt an unexpected flicker of admiration for him. He was right. This marriage wasn't just about her. It wasn't about him either. It was about the future of both species, and though it was hard to admit, she knew that her mother had planned this marriage for a reason. The rest of the journey to Zelthora passed in awkward silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Zelthara tried to ignore the knot in her stomach. She had always been a proud Zelthari, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that something about this marriage wasn't just about politics. It was about change. The marriage ceremony was a grand affair, as it was more than just a union between two individuals. It was a symbol of political strength. The Zelthari royals, the council members, and diplomats from various factions were all present. The ceremony took place in the Hall of Stars, a magnificent structure that reflected the deep pride the Zelthari had in their culture. Zelthara stood at the altar, dressed in the ceremonial robes of her people, her gaze fixed on the floor. She had agreed to the ceremony for the sake of peace, but the weight of the event felt heavy on her chest. Her mother stood beside her, a proud smile on her face, though her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. Eric, standing across from her, looked every bit the part of a diplomat. His simple, formal attire contrasted with the elaborate gowns of the Zelthari, but there was something about his presence, steady, unwavering, that made Zelthara feel oddly secure. When it came time to exchange vows, Zelthara felt a tightness in her throat. She had nothing to say, no promises to make. Eric, however, spoke in calm, clear words that seemed to reach deep inside her. "We may not have chosen this path, but we will walk it together," he said. "I promise to honor you as my partner, as a representative of both our peoples. This is the beginning of something greater than ourselves." Zelthara couldn't help but feel a pang of discomfort as he spoke. Was she truly ready for this? Could she really live up to her role in this marriage? The moment passed, and the ceremony was sealed with a kiss. A formality, she reminded herself. She had no love for this human, nor did she believe in the marriage. But as she gazed into Eric's eyes, she saw a reflection of the same uncertainty that she felt deep inside. This was only the beginning, and the future was uncertain. The days following the marriage ceremony were filled with tension and awkwardness. Zelthara and Eric had settled into a large, luxurious estate on Zelthora. Though they were legally wed, their relationship remained cold, almost mechanical. The marriage was a political one, and neither of them expected anything more than that. Zelthara spent most of her time in the vast gardens, her thoughts consumed with the weight of her mother's ambitions and the strain of her own position. Eric, meanwhile, spent his days working with Zelthari officials, attending meetings, and making small talk with other diplomats. Despite the obvious gap in their cultural backgrounds, they both threw themselves into their respective duties, knowing the eyes of both species were upon them. Zelthara, however, was conflicted. She had been raised to believe that Zelthari culture was superior, that their way of life was unmatched by any other species in the galaxy. And yet, here she was, tied to a human, a species she had always viewed as beneath her. Every time she caught sight of Eric, her thoughts seemed to contradict themselves. She had to admit there was something about him that drew her in. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't dismissive or prejudiced. He didn't care about her status as a sterile, and there was a kindness in his eyes she couldn't ignore. Eric, too, found himself thinking about Zelthara more than he expected. He had seen the way her face tightened whenever they spoke about the marriage. He knew she hadn't wanted this, that she didn't believe in it, but he couldn't help but admire her strength, her intelligence, and the quiet grace she carried despite the situation. He'd been through enough political games to understand how important appearances were. But he wanted something more than just a political marriage. Somewhere in his heart, he began hoping for the connection he had yet to feel. However, their personal feelings were not the concern of the Zelthari Council. They were focused on one thing: the future. And soon, something would happen that no one expected, least of all Zelthara herself. It started with the symptoms. At first, Zelthara thought it was the stress from her new life, or perhaps the lingering effects of the ceremonial feast they had held. She felt nauseous, but she chalked it up to the unfamiliar foods that had been served. Her stomach would twist in discomfort, and sometimes she would feel dizzy for no reason at all. Probably just an effect of the long days, she told herself one evening as she reclined on a plush chair staring at the stars from her balcony. But the symptoms didn't go away. Instead, they worsened over the next few weeks. Eric noticed it too. He had been a diplomat long enough to know when something was off with someone, and it was clear that Zelthara was not her usual self. She was more tired than usual, her skin paler, her movements slower. It didn't take long before he started to worry. He brought up his concerns carefully. "Zelthara, I think it might be a good idea to see a healer. You don't look well." She had brushed him off, of course. "I'm fine. Just a bit of fatigue," she had said, but the words didn't convince either of them. Days later, when the nausea and fatigue didn't subside, Zelthara finally agreed to visit the Zelthari medical facility. At first, the healers attributed her symptoms to stress, but something wasn't adding up. They ran a series of tests, and after a long wait, the results were delivered. Zelthara was pregnant. The news was so shocking, so impossible, that Zelthara didn't know how to react. The healers were baffled. According to their records, she was infertile, sterile by birth. The procedure that had been used to ensure that no sterile could conceive had been carried out on her before she had reached puberty. Yet here she was, pregnant. The child growing inside her didn't make any sense. She immediately sought out Eric, her mind racing. "This is impossible," she told him, her voice tense with disbelief. I'm pregnant." Eric's expression mirrored her confusion, but there was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't place. "You're sure?" he asked carefully. Zelthara nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't understand. How can this happen? I've been told for my whole life that I could never have children." Eric, ever the diplomat, took a deep breath. "The healers are sure." "They are," she said, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "They can't explain it either." Eric was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "This is unexpected, but it doesn't change the fact that we have to figure this out together. Whatever this means, we'll handle it." Zelthara couldn't understand how to feel. A part of her was overwhelmed by fear, the fear of the unknown. The other part, however, couldn't deny the strange flicker of something else, something she hadn't felt before. A sense of connection, perhaps, but what did it mean? Was this child a blessing or a curse? News of Zelthara's pregnancy quickly spread throughout the Zelthari political world, and the reactions were immediate and intense. The council members debated behind closed doors. There were those who saw the pregnancy as a miracle, an opportunity to explore a new future for the Zelthari, one where they could adapt and evolve. But there were others who feared what it represented. It was a break from the traditional order, a sign that Zelthari genetics could no longer be trusted. Zelthara's mother, Andara, was the most vocal opponent. She could not hide her fury when she learned the truth. "This is unacceptable," Andara shouted, her face flushed with rage. "You're carrying the child of a human. This is a mistake that could destroy everything we've worked for." Zelthara stood tall before her mother, trying to mask the pain in her heart. "It's not a mistake, Mother. It's real. This child is mine." "Yours?" Andara's eyes narrowed. "You've allowed your emotions to cloud your judgment. This could lead to the downfall of our people, Zelthara. You are a symbol for our species, and this act is a disgrace." Zelthara's chest tightened. I'm carrying a child, not a disgrace. You need to understand that this could change everything and maybe, just maybe, this is something we can learn from." Her mother's eyes flickered with a mixture of anger and fear, but she said nothing more. The conversation had reached its limits. Meanwhile, Eric stood by Zelthara's side, always calm and measured. "We need to protect her and the child, Zelthara. This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about us and what we can create together." Zelthara stared at him, torn between the political pressure from her mother and her growing belief in the power of this miracle. Could this child, this unexpected life, be the key to a new beginning for both of their peoples? But even as she pondered these questions, one thing was clear. Zelthara's world was shifting, and she had no idea how to stop the change. Everything was about to get more complicated than either she or Eric could have ever imagined. The weeks after Zelthara's shocking discovery were tense. News of her pregnancy spread like wildfire across the galaxy, and the Zelthari Council quickly realized that this wasn't just a personal matter. It was a political bombshell. The members of the council, the most powerful individuals in Zelthora, were deeply divided. Some saw Zelthara's pregnancy as a blessing, a sign that their species could overcome the infertility that had plagued them for so long. Others feared the consequences of such an unpredictable event. The idea of a Zelthari bearing a human child was unthinkable to many. Zelthara's mother, Andara, was at the center of the opposition. As a high-ranking member of the council, she had spent her life building the Zelthari Empire on the foundation of purity, tradition, and superiority. The thought of her daughter's child being half-human in her eyes threatened everything she had worked for. "You must end this madness, Zelthara," Andara demanded during their next meeting. Her voice was cold and full of anger. "You have no idea what you've started. This child is a symbol of everything we've fought against. It will destroy the very essence of Zelthari culture." Zelthara, standing in front of her mother in the Grand Council chamber, felt a sharp pang in her chest. Her mother's words stung, but she refused to back down. "This child is not a threat, Mother," she said, her voice steady but firm. "It is a new beginning. It may be hard for you to understand, but I believe it's the future." Andara's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You are blinded by emotions. If you don't end this now, we will lose everything we've built. The council is already questioning our leadership. You will be seen as a traitor to your people." Zelthara felt the weight of her mother's words, but she refused to give in. She turned to Eric, who had been standing by her side, watching the exchange with quiet resolve. "You don't understand, Eric. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the future of my people, and we have to decide if we're ready to change." Eric placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a supportive squeeze. "We don't have to fight this alone. I'm with you, Zelthara. We'll face whatever comes together." Their alliance, though fragile at times, was stronger now than ever. Zelthara felt a renewed sense of determination. Despite the political pressure from her mother, despite the uncertainty about the future, she knew that the life growing inside her was important. This child could be the key to breaking the cycle of infertility that had plagued the Zelthari for generations. As tensions grew on Zelthora, so did the fear among the Zelthari Council. A meeting was called to discuss the situation, and all eyes turned to Zelthara. The council room was filled with whispers, with leaders from various sectors speaking in hushed tones. The air was thick with uncertainty, and it was clear that not everyone was in agreement. One of the council members, Krelthar, a powerful and influential figure, stood up and addressed the room. "This is a crisis," he said, his voice booming across the room. "A child born of a Zelthari and a human will never be accepted. It will be a stain on our history. We cannot allow this to happen." The room murmured in agreement. Some of the older council members, those who had lived through the last few decades of war and political unrest, nodded in grim approval. But there were others who remained silent, their faces unreadable. Zelthara's mother, Andara, stood beside Krelthar, her face tight with resolve. "We must act quickly," she said, her voice cold and determined. "The longer we wait, the harder it will be to undo the damage this pregnancy has caused. I will not allow the future of the Zelthari to be tainted by this mistake." Zelthara's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't allow her child to be seen as a mistake. It was her life, her body, and her choice. She glanced at Eric and he gave her a reassuring look. "I've made my decision," she said, stepping forward with confidence. "I will not end this pregnancy. This child is my future and I will fight for it." A heavy silence followed her declaration. The council members exchanged looks, some with disbelief, others with anger. Krelthar sneered at her. "You would choose a human over your own kind," he spat. "You would bring the Zelthari to ruin for the sake of one child." Zelthara's voice was steady, though her heart raced. "This is not just about one child. It's about change, about hope for the future. We can't keep living in the past, Krelthar. We have to evolve. If we keep clinging to old traditions, we will never move forward." Andara, unable to hide her frustration any longer, stepped forward. "Zelthara, I raised you better than this. You were meant for greatness, and now you are throwing it all away for a child that can never belong to our people. You are making a grave mistake." Zelthara's eyes flashed with determination. "I am making the right decision for me. For us." The room was dead silent as everyone waited for the council's next move. Zelthara could feel the tension rising. This wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a matter of political survival. The council had the power to support her or to destroy her. Eric spoke up, his voice calm and clear. "If you want peace, you will have to accept change. And if you want the future of both Zelthora and Earth to thrive, you must open your minds. The future is not one of division, it's one of unity." The council looked at each other, considering Eric's words. Zelthara knew that their decision was crucial. This moment would determine not just her future, but the future of her species, and possibly the entire galaxy. Later that night, Zelthara and Eric stood together on the balcony of their home, watching the twin moons of Zelthora rise over the horizon. The air was cool, and the stars sparkled brightly above them. Despite everything that had happened, Zelthara felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She had made her choice. The future was uncertain, but she knew it was a future she could shape. "Do you think they'll accept us?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the stars. Eric looked at her, his expression serious but filled with hope. "I think they will have to. They'll see the truth eventually, the truth that we're stronger together. This child is a symbol of that." Zelthara smiled, though it was a bittersweet smile. "I hope you're right." Eric pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together, and we'll make it through." For the first time in a long time, Zelthara felt a flicker of hope for the future. Whatever the council decided, whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. Together, she and Eric would change the fate of their people, and perhaps even the galaxy itself. The days following the council's decision were filled with uncertainty. The Zelthari government, once powerful and unchallenged, was now at a crossroads. Zelthara had stood her ground, refusing to give up her pregnancy, and the decision had sparked a firestorm. Some Zelthari citizens supported her, seeing her pregnancy as a sign of hope, a chance to move past centuries of infertility. Others, like the more conservative leaders, viewed it as a threat, a sign that their culture, their way of life, was slipping away. The council had been split down the middle, and while no official verdict had been reached, Zelthara could feel the tension in the air. She knew that her actions had irrevocably changed things. For better or worse, the future was now in her hands. One afternoon, as the sun began to set over the vast landscape of Zelthora, Zelthara stood on the balcony of her home, watching the swirling clouds paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. Eric joined her, his presence a quiet comfort in the midst of the political chaos that surrounded them. "How do you feel?" Eric asked, his voice gentle but full of concern. Zelthara sighed, resting her hands on the railing. "I don't know. Every day feels like a new challenge. The council is still divided, and my mother," her voice faltered for a moment, "she's not giving up. She'll do whatever it takes to make sure this doesn't succeed." Eric placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her. "I know it's tough. But what matters is that we're doing what we believe in. The future doesn't belong to the past, Zelthara. It belongs to you and me, and to our child." She turned to look at him, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. "I just don't want this child to be caught in the middle. I want him or her to grow up in a world that's different from the one I knew. A world where they can be whoever they want to be, without the weight of old traditions hanging over them." "You're already doing that," Eric said, his smile soft but sincere. "You're already changing the world by simply standing up for what's right. The child will grow up knowing the strength it takes to change things." Zelthara smiled back, though there was still a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She didn't know what the future held, but she was certain of one thing. She was no longer just a symbol of the old ways. She was a part of something new, something bigger than herself. And she wouldn't let anything tear that away. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of political battles and growing support from unexpected places. Zelthara and Eric received messages of encouragement from various human colonies, as well as from groups within the Zelthari who had long questioned the rigid, outdated systems. A movement began to form, a movement that called for unity, for breaking down the barriers between species, and for embracing the possibility of a new, more inclusive future. At the same time, Zelthara's mother and the more traditionalist members of the council continued to push for an end to the pregnancy, even going so far as to threaten Zelthara with exile if she refused to comply. But Zelthara remained steadfast, refusing to back down. The pressure was immense, but she had something her mother didn't: hope. She had seen the way her child's presence had begun to change her perspective, and she could feel the stirrings of something much bigger than politics. This was about more than just a marriage between two species. This was about the future of all species, about the possibility of peace and unity in a galaxy that had long been divided by old grudges and prejudices. The turning point came unexpectedly. Zelthara had been summoned to the council chamber once again, where a final vote would be held on whether to recognize her pregnancy and allow her to continue her marriage to Eric. As she entered the grand chamber, the eyes of the entire council were on her. The room was tense and the air crackled with anticipation. Zelthara could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Her mother stood at the front, her arms crossed, a stern look on her face. Krelthar, the most vocal opponent of her pregnancy, stood beside her. They both looked like they were ready for a fight. Zelthara took a deep breath and stepped forward, standing tall before the council. Eric stood beside her, his presence a silent but powerful show of support. "Council members," Zelthara began, her voice strong and clear. "I know that this situation has caused great fear and uncertainty, but I ask you to look beyond the fear. Look at what we can become, what we can create together. This child is not a threat to Zelthora or to the Zelthari people. It is a chance for us to grow, to evolve, and to build a future where all species, all individuals are valued." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room was silent, the council members exchanging glances. Zelthara's mother's face was tight with anger, but even she couldn't deny the truth in her daughter's words. "We can continue to live in the past, clinging to old traditions that divide us," Zelthara continued. "Or we can embrace change, embrace the future. I know it's hard to let go of what we've always known, but sometimes the hardest things are the ones that lead to the greatest rewards." Zelthara's words echoed in the chamber. There was a long moment of silence before one of the council members, an older Zelthari woman named Valera, stood up. "I've lived through many changes in my time," Valera said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I've seen our people struggle because we refuse to adapt." Zelthara is right. The future belongs to those who are brave enough to embrace it. One by one, the council members began to speak, offering their support. Some were still hesitant, but the majority saw the truth in Zelthara's words. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the vote was called. The result was clear. Zelthara and Eric's marriage would be recognized, and their child would be allowed to live. The council had voted for change, for a new future. When the news was announced, the planet erupted in both celebration and protest. Many Zelthari citizens were overjoyed by the outcome, seeing it as a victory for progress. Others were fearful of what the future might bring, but even they could not deny that something had shifted in their world. Zelthara and Eric stood together in the middle of the storm, their hearts full of hope. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, opposition, and difficult decisions. But they also knew that they had made a stand for themselves, for their child, and for a future where unity and cooperation were possible. As Zelthara looked out over the horizon, her hand resting on her growing belly, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The journey ahead would be hard, but she was ready. She and Eric would face it together, side by side, with the hope that their child would grow up in a world where they were not defined by their species, but by their ability to create change. The dawn of a new era had arrived, and it was just the beginning.